Welcome back to the shop, everyone, and in today's video we're going to be changing the stator that went bad on this 700 Rhino. This happens to be a 2011. I hope it's a good video because it sounds like it's going to be a big job. Stick around. So for starters, if you guys are interested on how to diagnose your stator, whether it's bad or good, that'll be linked down below the last video I did, where I was also doing, oddly enough, the stator on my snowmobile that's actually parked, well, still right over there. I haven't put it back in the shed yet. But this is what we're dealing with at the moment. So we got completely burnt out plugs. That was kind of my first indication that we had an issue with the stator. But oddly enough, when we tested it, it tests good. So we also have down below in here this to deal with. So hopefully we got another one of these in the box, because this one I don't think is going to work very well. So before we get really into it, this stator is bathed in oil, so we're going to have to remove the oil plug in the bottom, drain all the oil out of it. It's also a good opportunity to do the oil filter right at the back there, and it's looking like we're going to have to replace or at least remove these lines. And they might have been leaking a little bit here, so it's going to be a good time to reseal that as well. So let's get started. All right, so we got the Rhino jacked up a little bit, and oh, there's still quite a tight spot to get in here to undo the plug. But let's see if I can crack it free. Oh boy, that was tight. And the next thing is to see if I'm going to make a mess. I shouldn't, because the drain pan's right there. Everything should go just smoothly. Perfect. That worked out. Next, we're going to remove the oil filters, since we got the oil all draining. And yeah, the chances are, guys, I know you can't see it, it's all the way behind here. Luckily, this one here I bought last time with the ability to remove with a socket, so it makes it easier for me. And it's kind of hard to film because this is kind of a tight spot, so hopefully you guys can see what's going on. And one thing you didn't see there is a big mess, because I totally missed the drain pan that time. I swear, every time I make an oil change, or do an oil change I should say, I end up making a mess. There's nothing I can do. I try every time. I got this nice big oil pan, and there it is. It's all over the floor. Highly recommend this type of filter, guys. It just makes your job way easier. You know, I think the next thing I should tackle before we get too far into removing the cover is to remove these two rigid lines. And again, right at the back, you got banjo fittings. So you got to remove those. Those are Allen wrenches. I believe they're number 4s. And we have to pull those out. I'm going to try and keep them together so that I know which way they run. And then also going to remove it right from the top here. And then get to the bolts that are holding the case together. Okay, so those are the two rigid lines you see there. I actually screwed the filter back on loosely just so that none of the dirt makes its way into the engine. But yeah, that's what you get to deal with. I just snuck the camera between the wheel well here, but yeah, it's not the easiest to get to, especially since you can't, I can't really easily dump the box in this one because it's full of junk, but I might have to do it anyway. Now that the lines are loose at the back, should be able to undo these mechanical clamps. Just like that. And this should hopefully just pull right out of the clamps like this and slide out kind of like so. I don't think you can mess these up, but in case you can, what I'm going to do is what I normally do. I'm going to go ahead and put a tie wrap on either side, and I'll know that these two belong together. So these little tie wraps don't really have much use other than what they're doing now. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to use them to my advantage, and that way there I can't make a mistake. There you go, now we know. Let's pull them apart. I don't get how that was leaking because that is really tight in there. Come on, there we go. All right. So good enough. So the top hose goes to the top plug in the back. And this is dripping. Now let's do the same on this one. There we go. Yeah, they're in there pretty good. Awesome. Now we can turn our attention to these guys. So we've got quite a few of those to remove, and we're just gonna take them all out. We're gonna make note of where this bracket goes. That's why I make videos, because that's gonna make it easier for me. And then hopefully that'll give us all the access we need to the stator. So I have just about all the bolts removed here for the case. Then I remembered when I was working down here, I forgot that you have to drain the coolant. So that adds an extra element of fun to this job. Now in an effort to prevent from having to drain the entire coolant and bleeding it fully, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some pliers, I'm going to pinch off this line. Then I'm going to remove this is the bleeder screw for the pump. That should drain the engine, and it should also drain the pump and whatever's left in this line, because then I have to disconnect this line so that I can gain access to the screws that are behind this pump in order to remove the cover. So yeah, this is it's not the easiest job. It's a little bit more entailed, but well, we're just going to keep plugging away at it. I have the pliers pinching off that hose. We'll see if it's going to be enough to stop it from leaking all the way out. Shouldn't get that much fluid from the engine, but we're going to get some for sure. I'm anticipating probably about 1 liter. So we've got our pan down below. Let's hope that we get this right, because there's nothing worse than coolant. It just gets really slick. Okay. It's not leaking all that much. If anything, it actually stopped, so that's kind of cool. What I am going to do, though, there is another bleed screw, and that one here is on the top of the engine near the thermostat housing, so I'm going to crack that one right now and see if I can continue bleeding the rest of the air out of the engine. Let's see what happens here. So that's loose. It should have some fluid coming out any moment if it works the way I think it will. Otherwise, maybe we'll get lucky and not have to lose much coolant. Oh, there it is. Perfect. It's nice because you can control the flow at this point. So I've gone around and I checked, and I should have all the bolts removed, including the 2 lines down below. That was actually pretty easy. I got the line up front tucked away here, still pinched off. This one's disconnected. So with a rubber mallet, I should be able to break this free, and if it doesn't, that means I missed a bolt somewhere. And it looks like I might have missed a bolt somewhere. The other thing I'm going to do is there's a couple of pry points here. There's one here, and there's one right here. I'm going to get a pry bar, and I'm just going to lightly put some pressure here, just see if it breaks free, and if it doesn't, I definitely forgot a bolt somewhere. I'm going to use the rubber side of this mallet, like the handle I mean. Just give it a light pry. Oh, nice. It broke free, at least at the top. So that's a good sign. But it still feels like it's being held in at the bottom. So I'm not going to put too much more pressure. Yeah, there's definitely something holding on. Now it's up to finding where that bolt is. I found it. You can barely see it, guys, but it's right at the end of my flashlight there, which means I have to remove that rigid line that is for coolant. That's another, I think it's a 5mm hex, and then it should all come out. Okay, now I think it's ready to go here. Yes, it is. Now you're going to feel the magnetic pull from that stator against the flywheel. And now I just have to run these wires around some hoses and get that out of the way. We'll have to remember that they run back there for the reinstallation. And just like that, there's our stator. Nicely cooked, might I add. That looks dark. That's not the way I normally see them. Interesting. On the left, right over here, we have our brand new stator from RM Stator, and clearly still installed is the OEM stator that is pretty toasty. So we're going to definitely be replacing it with a good one, and the kit also came with a gasket, which is really cool. But one thing it didn't come with, because if you guys watched my last video, my venture, actually right over there, I did that one just before I did this one, and it came with some plugs for the chassis side. I went through the box, I couldn't find any plugs. I made a call to the company and I asked them if it's possible that they had either forgotten to install them, and if they didn't, if it was an option. Now they don't have them. It's not an option for this machine, so it's going to be a bit of a problem for me. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to tackle this yet, because this is clearly an issue. I mean, it's going to be brand new on this side, but on the chassis side, as you saw earlier in the video, it's cooked. I need to do something about it. So I think I know what I am going to do, but before we go any further, I'm going to remove this gasket material, clean it all up, and then I'm also going to reinstall this one. There's really nothing too complicated in here, guys. I am going to film it, but one thing you need to note is, oh, right over here, before I get too far, this is your water pump. I don't like to touch these because when I go to reinstall it, right now it's set so that it's just going to slide right in, and I'm not going to have an issue. If you do turn it, don't sweat it. You'll just have to, finagle it, and little bits at a time until it actually does engage into the cam. Well, what it is basically is just like a slot, right? It just sits in there. So, all right, so let me put the camera down and we'll get to replacing the stator. Let's start by breaking free this bracket here that keeps the wires protected and away from all the internal moving parts. These are just number 4 metric Allens, nice and easy. When it comes to stuff like this, I avoid using power tools because these cases are aluminum. If you tend to go a little bit too hard on them, it's possible that you could damage the threads. Then you have to deal with that, and you have to, either chase the threads or put in a helicoil or, something like that. I just use a regular hand tool because then I can feel everything I'm doing. I'm going to do the same on this one here, which is the pickup. Ooh, see how I almost turned that? Hopefully I didn't. And that one's going to need a little bit of a nudge to release. Just like that. I wasn't too concerned because this one's damaged anyways. Now we got the 3 bolts holding the actual stator in place. Oh, guys, the smell of this thing is just, oh, it's unreal. It smells burnt. If you know what that means, or that kind of smells like, that's what this is. It's really gross anyways. So now we can take it out, and this is where we can have a nice look at it as to, like, even, yeah, it's like really cooked. Ooh. Like that was a tie wrap that just literally fell apart. Unreal. Okay, so let's pull this out from here, like that, and that will be for a show and tell, I guess. Then we get to deal with this gasket material. Now there's a couple ways I deal with it, especially when it's nice and stuck like this. I will go around with a razor blade. Now some people say, well, that's not a good idea because you can gouge it and this and that. Yeah, if you're not careful, you definitely will gouge the material. But if you are careful and you keep your blade nice and square, you'll be able to peel this up really nicely. And then I like to finish it off with gasket remover. It's a nice product that just, you know, cleans it all up and makes it all nice and shiny. I don't use that material though, or that spray, if there happens to be rubber material or grommets around that I'm not replacing, because it will eat away at that stuff. So let's just clean this up with a razor blade and see how it looks. So I got a fresh razor blade on this one here, and this particular holder isn't exactly great. Maybe I'm holding it wrong, but it tends to want to open. You don't want that. I don't want to get cut. But see how it's just kind of peeling right off? No biggie. Yeah. This is a, whatchamacallit, one of those dollar store, thrift stores. I don't recommend that. I'm going to go get my good holder. I basically bought it for the blades because I go through razor blades doing this stuff. And I mean, I don't really need a super sharp blade. So let me go get a good holder and we'll get going. This is one of my older blade holders. As you can tell, it's got lots of use, but it's also my better one because it locks properly and it holds the blade where it's supposed to be. Perfect. Now that's going to work just nice. Just come back from the parts washer and it's all nice and clean. So what we're going to do now is we're going to assemble the new stator in place, which is actually quite simple. We're just going to kind of do the reverse of the other one. A couple of things I'd like to add is I'm going to add some thread locker to the bolts, and I'm also going to add a little bit of flange gasket maker to some of these areas, right? So we don't want any oil leaks. So just a little extra things that I like to do. Let's start by adding a little bit of thread locker to these bolts, and I forgot to clean these, so let's just give them a quick wipe so that the thread locker does its job. Don't forget, guys, you don't need lots here. A little bit goes a long way. It's just to make sure that nothing moves. So let's secure the stator in place with the 3 bolts. Alright, I'm going to go around and just snug these up. Alright, perfect. Now let's move on to this grommet situation here. Cool thing is it does slide up and down the wire, so you can set it exactly where you want. But before, like I said earlier, I don't want any oil leaks, so I'm going to add a little bit of this sealant to the flange. Chances are it wouldn't leak because Yamaha has provided us with a double seal, so I think that's pretty interesting. It's probably a really good seal already, but we're in here. I don't want to have to come back in here for a long time, so let's do it right the first time and make sure she's all good to go. So we're going to push that down in place. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the pickup here in place with its hardware. Click. And one more click over here. Click. Perfect. Now we can't forget this guy, because as simple as this part looks, it actually has a pretty important role, and that's to make sure that none of the rotating parts inside the engine are going to ever touch that wire harness, right? So let's do the same over here. Put these in, perfect. And yes, I probably should be looking up the torque specs for this, but I've done this multiple times, so I kind of know what I need to do when it comes to putting in the torque spec, or at least for tightness. So now we're going to move on to making sure all my bottles are tight so nothing goes dry. But we're going to put in the gasket. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple of dabs of some of the gasket maker here, just to hold the gasket in place, so that when I'm putting it into the assembly, like right into the bike where it's nice and tight and nobody can see anything, it ain't going to fall out. So that's a couple of dabs here and there. And make sure that around this here definitely has enough sealant, and I like to put a little bit of a line over top around the dowels. Now this gasket should go like so. And then we can do the same thing again on this side, so that when it meets the other end of the engine, it'll be just as good. You know what they say, devil's in the details. So there it is, details. All right, now let's go see if this is going to pop in place and not give me too many troubles, because I made sure I didn't turn my water pump. So hopefully it didn't move at all. And we're going in with the new stator. Hopefully everything lines up like it should. And off camera, guys, what I did is I also cleaned up the mating surfaces so that it would be nice and clean without any issues. But I'm having a problem right here now. My wires want to come out. So maybe if I hold it this way. There we go. Now you see the importance of making sure everything is kind of dabbed with some gasket maker. And that was the stator pulling itself in with the magnetic force. And it looks like I've got it in. All I need to do now is cinch it up with a whole bunch of those bolts, and then we're in business. Cool. Everything is buttoned up. We're all back together, so all the hardware is nice and tight. I went around a couple times to make sure it was snug. We got the rigid lines back in place. We have a new oil filter in the back. All these rubber hoses for the cooling system are in place, including the rigid hose down there. And I wasn't able to find the same filter, but we got a new filter on the back. So what we have to deal with next will be this wire harness. We're gonna have to go to the store and find a solution for this, because yeah, it's just not gonna work with the new one. But before we forget, I also have the oil filter plug, the oil plug in the engine all nice and tight. So we're gonna put some oil in it right now before we forget that, and then we'll go and move on to the next step. Okay, so we got our assistant today doing the oil because, well, she wanted to do it. She's my apprentice, she's learning. So I'm going to do the filming today, and I have heard in the comments that I'm not the best videographer, but I'm going to try and do my best and get the right angles. So we got the oil coming in. Oh yeah, that's right, you got to give it a good shake, because if you don't, what happens?
It separates itself.
Well, sort of. So all the additives tend to make their way to the bottom of the can when you're just letting it sit on the shelf, right? So here we go. Can we do a perfect pour? Well, that's pretty easy, right? So it's going to take about 2 liters of oil, and then we're going to see if it's all topped up. Move on to replacing the plugs. Now it's time to deal with this wiring. I've been trying to avoid it, to be honest with you, because I'm not going to go buy a plug because I don't have the right crimp tool anyways to make it all happen. So I came up with an idea. But let's start by connecting the ones that are okay. And before we do that, we're going to put some dielectric grease that is actually provided in the kit, which is kind of nice. So we're going to use just a little dab. We're going to start with this one, this pickup, because we know it's going to be okay. Just like this one here. This one's also going to be good. Put a little bit down in there, into the plug. So let's get these connections done. Let's see what we're dealing with. So that leaves us with these two. So we're going to cut this one off. And it doesn't matter which, as you can tell, it's kind of already twisted in the harness. It doesn't matter which white wire goes to which one, whether it even be this one. All three white wires do the same thing, and they're rectified underneath the dash, under the hood, I should say, up at the front. So we're gonna cut these off here, cut this off here. I'm gonna put some blade connectors that are sealed at the ends. So you shrink these up and they are going to be sealed on the wire side. Plus, once the connection is made, let's say like this, I'm going to slide some more shrink over top of the entire connection and seal that up. And because this was clear, it's actually cool because we know what we're dealing with. If there's any moisture inside, we'll see it. Or if there's any dirt that builds up, we'll see that as well. And if I ever have to come in and test this again, I'll just have to cut the heat shrink off and we'll have a plug. So let's get that done. I hate to do this, but snip on a nice, perfectly crimped connector. But it needed to be done. Now I'm going to get this end down below. Same thing will happen, but I'm going to try and give myself as much wire as possible because it's just going to be easier for myself later. So cut there, cut there. And I am going with a similar sized connector so that I'm not going to cause any issues with power delivery. Clean that up. Strip off the insulation here. Okay. So for the sake of making everything nice and easy, I'm going to put the same style connector at this end. So I'm going to go with the female end. Oh, I know we just had to use the tool to get that out from between here, eh? But that was off camera. Okay, so let's do this one. Make sure you got all the wires in the connector to get the best possible crimp. I'm going to use this guy. I'm going to double crimp that just to be sure. Tug test, we're good. Do it on this end, and we'll repeat this same process down below. So now I've got the connections made down below here, both ends. So I'm going to be very carefully heat shrinking these ends. And whenever you're doing any type of work with some open flame around an engine, be extra cautious that there's nothing leaking, no gasoline. I really should get a heat gun. I don't have one. That's probably the next thing I should purchase. But we're going to turn this down as low as I can, and then we'll heat this up. Come on. Apparently I'm low on fuel too. There we go. That should do it. We can't forget this heat shrink over top of these ones, so we're going to slide this down on this end. And I gave myself just enough so that I can make the connection. And then of course a little bit of dielectric grease in these plugs. So that's what our connection looks like now. I went a little bit crazy on the length on the one end, but it seals perfectly around the actual plugs. So I'm very happy about that. And we're going to move on to maybe firing it up now. Moment of truth, guys. So we're going to find out if this actually is going to do the job and it's going to start charging again. So right now we're sitting at 12.4. That's with the ignition off. And keep in mind, we don't have any coolant yet in the engine, but we're not going to go too crazy and run it for a long period of time. I want to make sure that the stator is actually going to do its job. And if it does, we're good. We're going to carry on and we're going to do the bleeding of the cooling system. But want to do the honors?
Sure.
Fire it up. All right, well, right away, we're seeing 13.5, 13.6. It's climbing. It's holding steady at 13.7. That's a good sign. Really good sign. Is it a neutral? Yes? Okay, can you give it a little bit of gas and let's see if it's going to stay there. Well, it seems to be cutting out at about 14, so that's perfect. I am super happy to see that, guys. I thought for sure there might have been an issue with the voltage regulator as to why that stator burnt up in the first place. Still not exactly sure what it is. I'm assuming maybe a connection problem right at the plug there, and it was maybe arcing itself out due to moisture, water, mud, who knows what, right? So that's why I sealed it the way I did. I'm going to keep monitoring it. I'm going to go for a ride, and I'm going to maybe set up my meter through the dash so that I can read the meter and check the voltage while I'm riding. But at this point, I'm going to move on. We're going to add coolant to the cooling system, and we're going to bleed it, and it's not actually that bad. So what I've done is, according to Yamaha, you have to raise the front of the Rhino by about a foot, maybe a little higher. So you can see I've got my jack stands down below, always safe. And what I'm going to do now is I got the radiator cap removed. I'm going to fill the radiator until it's full. Then I'm going to go make my way to the thermostat housing. And on the top of the thermostat housing, on the side, there's a little plug for the air. That's the air plug that I removed earlier on this video so that I can let the air out of the engine. Well, I'm going to use that same plug now to bleed the cooling system. So I purchased just some pre-mixed stuff just because I want to make sure that I don't have any contaminants in the cooling system. So I'm going to take my time here, nice and slow, just fill it up. And right there. So now we got it full to the neck. And then on the other side, you're going to need an 8mm wrench. And I'm going to show you where you need to bleed it. And now with an 8mm wrench, you're just going to break this free. I didn't have it very tight because I had it open off earlier. And we're going to just listen for some air or look for some fluid to come out of this. There's the air. All right, all the air's out. So I'm going to put this back on. We're going to go back to the front. We're going to check the radiator, and if it's going to have dropped a little bit for sure. We're going to top it off. We're going to do this procedure a few times until the radiator stays full. Oh, perfect. So now we've got some fluid coming out, no more air. That's good. What we're going to do is we're going to snug this up for a final time. We're going to go to the front, top off the radiator, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now that the radiator's full, you can actually see it at this point, nice and topped off. It's almost a little bit over full, but the reason for that is because I anticipated a little bit of coolant to come out, because what we need to do now is we need to bleed the water pump. Because if we don't bleed the water pump, it's just going to cavitate and it won't circulate the fluid. So there's same thing on the other as the same side. It's the same size bolt, so you need an 8mm wrench yet again. And right at the top of the water pump, right down here, we're going to remove that until the liquid comes out. And then at that point, then we're good to fire it up. Alright, so that's good. The water pump is now full. We're going to tighten that up. We're going to check for some leaks. Now we can fire it up. We can put the cap back on, check for leaks, and then we should be good to go. We got the Rhino all buttoned up now. Everything is where it's supposed to be. One thing I forgot to mention is if you go through the gauge cluster inside, I think if you press mode, you will be able to actually display the voltage being put out to the battery. And it's accurate within 0.1 of a volt, at least with my multimeter connected to the battery directly. So that's really cool. I won't have to carry my multimeter around to see if the voltage is okay. The other thing I'm going to do before we go for too long of a ride, I'm going to have it run for about 15-20 minutes. I'm going to let it go up to temperature, make sure that there's no coolant leaks, make sure there's no oil leaks, and then after that we should be golden for many years to come. So that's about it for today's video, guys. Really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.